I've always felt a deep connection to the wild, something about the untouched beauty of nature that calls to me in a way nothing else does. My name's Emma, and for years now, I've made it a point to escape into the dense forests near my small town, camera in hand, hoping to catch a glimpse of life most people never see. There's a quiet thrill in wandering alone beneath towering trees, the way the light filters through the canopy, and the subtle sounds that tell stories if you know how to listen. Photography is more than a hobby for me, it's a way to capture moments that are fleeting, moments that belong to the forest alone. On one particular morning in early spring, the air was cool and crisp, the kind that carries the scent of earth and new growth. I set out before dawn, hiking past familiar trails that wind through the thick woods, my boots crunching softly against the carpet of fallen leaves. The forest was still waking up, the birds just beginning their chatter, and everything felt suspended in that fragile quiet between night and day. I was drawn deeper than usual, chasing after the soft rustle of underbrush, hoping to spot a rare bird or maybe a shy deer. As I climbed a small ridge, my breath forming little clouds in the cold air, I paused to adjust my camera settings. The trees here grew close together, their trunks gnarled and ancient, twisted roots snaking beneath the moss-covered ground. I knelt by a patch of wildflowers, focusing my lens on a delicate bloom glistening with morning dew. That's when I first noticed it, a faint sound behind me, like footsteps brushing against dry leaves. At first, I thought it might be another hiker, or maybe even a curious animal, but the forest was supposed to be empty this early. I turned slowly, scanning the shadows between the trees, heart ticking up just a little. Nothing. Just the soft sway of branches and the occasional call of a distant bird. I shrugged it off and continued, but the feeling lingered, like something was watching, waiting. I moved carefully, trying to stay alert. The forest around me was a maze of dark trunks and tangled undergrowth, the kind of place where light barely touched the ground. The shadows seemed to dance with the breeze, whispering secrets I couldn't decipher. I kept my eyes peeled, catching glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of something slipping between the trees. It wasn't a deer or a bird, it was darker, more human-shaped. But whenever I turned to look directly, it vanished like smoke. With every step, my excitement for the morning's adventure twisted into unease. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the forest was playing tricks on me. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation of being followed. My fingers tightened on the camera strap as I walked, eyes darting to every shadow, every rustle. The sounds of the forest, once comforting, now felt like warnings. After what felt like hours, I reached a small clearing I'd discovered on a previous hike, a place where sunlight poured through the canopy and the air was warm enough to sit and rest. I settled on a fallen log, hoping a break would calm my nerves. As I breathed in the earthy scent and adjusted the settings on my camera, a whisper floated on the breeze. It was soft, like a sigh or a barely audible word, carried just beyond comprehension. I froze, heart thumping wildly. The whispering trees around me seemed alive in a new way, their rustling leaves forming a low murmur that crept into my skin. The forest felt less like a peaceful refuge and more like a living presence, watching and waiting. I scanned the perimeter, but the thick foliage revealed nothing. Gathering my courage, I stood up and decided to head back. The sun had climbed higher, and the forest had lost some of its early morning magic, replaced by a dense stillness. As I turned onto the trail, I caught the faintest hint of movement again, something slipping between the tree trunks, dark and fleeting. My breath caught as I tried to focus, but the figure disappeared before I could make it out. I quickened my pace, heart pounding, the camera now hanging forgotten around my neck. The forest seemed to close in around me, the distant bird calls silenced, replaced by the crunch of my boots and the steady beating of my own pulse. When I finally reached the edge of the woods, the sunlight felt like a shield, and I paused, looking back into the shadowy depths. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing, just tricks of light and imagination fueled by solitude. But I knew better. Something was there, lurking just beyond sight, its presence a dark thread woven into the forest's fabric. The feeling of dread settled deep inside me, a quiet warning that this place held secrets I wasn't meant to uncover. That night, I sat by my window, the forest visible in the distance, its black silhouette etched against the moonlit sky. I tried to shake the unease, telling myself I'd been foolish to wander so far alone. But the memory of those shadowed footsteps and whispered voices stayed with me, haunting the edges of my thoughts. I resolved to return, to face whatever it was that watched from the darkness, but next time, I wouldn't be alone. The forest was beautiful, yes, but it was also a place of hidden dangers, where the line between reality and something else was thinner than I could have imagined. And as I drifted into uneasy sleep, I knew that my adventures were only just beginning. After that unsettling morning, I found it impossible to shake the feeling that the forest was watching me. I kept replaying the shadowy figure darting between trees, the faint whispers slipping through the branches, and the way the forest morphed from a place of serenity to something far more sinister. Yet, despite the gnawing unease, I couldn't resist the pull of the woods. There was something magnetic about the mystery, a dark invitation I felt compelled to answer. Over the next few days, I returned, each time venturing deeper and lingering longer, trying to capture the elusive spirit of the forest through my lens. But instead of the calm I sought, I found the signs of something else, something deliberate, calculated, and unsettling. On one of the narrower trails, I stumbled upon a cluster of broken branches arranged in a pattern that didn't seem natural. They were snapped cleanly and placed in a crude arrow shape, pointing further into the woods. At first, I thought maybe an animal or a careless hiker had caused it, but the arrangement looked too purposeful, like a message or warning. Curiosity and anxiety warred inside me as I followed the trail the makeshift arrow indicated. The air grew heavier, cooler, and the light dimmer beneath the thick canopy. I noticed strange markings carved into the bark of several trees, simple, angular scratches, arranged in patterns I couldn't decipher. They were fresh, the exposed wood still pale and raw against the dark bark. My fingers itched to trace them, but a sudden chill stopped me. Stopping to catch my breath, I listened closely. The forest had grown quiet except for the soft rustling of leaves overhead. Then, faint whispers floated on the breeze, too low to catch words, but chilling enough to make my skin crawl. I froze, eyes scanning the shadows, heart pounding. The whispers seemed to swirl around me, weaving through the branches like ghosts speaking secrets meant to be kept. I took a few tentative photos of the markings and the broken branches, hoping to analyze them later. But as I lifted my camera, I caught movement just beyond the edge of my vision, a quick, dark blur slipping behind a tree. I swung my gaze around, but there was nothing there. My breath hitched, and I realized I was no longer alone. A few miles back, in town, I decided to stop at the ranger station to report what I'd seen and to ask if anyone else had noticed strange activity in the forest. The ranger, a middle-aged man named Tom with a knowing look behind his tired eyes, listened carefully as I described the broken branches, carvings, and whispers. "You're not the first to mention it," Tom said quietly, lowering his voice. "There have been reports lately, people disappearing, strange figures seen between the trees, odd symbols carved into the bark. The forest's been acting different. Folks around here avoid going too deep, especially alone. It's like something's changed." His words sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I'd never heard of disappearances in these woods before, and the idea of strange figures lurking only deepened the mystery. I asked if there was any explanation, anything that could make sense of it. Tom shook his head. "No one knows for sure. Some say it's old legends coming back, that the forest's got a spirit guarding it, angry at being disturbed. Others think it might be people, cults, maybe, using the woods for secret rituals. Whatever it is, it's enough to make most folks steer clear." I thanked him, my mind racing with possibilities. The forest that had once felt like a sanctuary was now a place loaded with warnings and shadows. Still, a stubborn part of me refused to be scared away. I needed to understand what was happening. I needed to see it for myself, to capture the truth beyond the whispers and broken branches. But as the days passed, the thrill of exploration began to give way to a gnawing paranoia. Every time I returned to the forest, I felt eyes on me, unseen watchers slipping just beyond my vision. The once comforting sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves now sounded like warnings or threats. I caught myself jumping at shadows, heart racing over every crack of a twig. One afternoon, I stopped at the edge of a clearing to rest. I noticed fresh footprints pressed into the soft earth, barely visible but distinct. They were large, unlike anything I'd seen from deer or other animals here. The prints led deeper into the forest, away from the trails I knew. My pulse quickened as I debated whether to follow. Part of me screamed to turn back, but the other part, hungry for answers, pushed me forward. As I followed the trail, the forest grew darker and the air colder, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The whispers returned, louder now, weaving through the trees like voices just out of reach. My skin prickled with every step, a primal fear rising in my chest. I paused, scanning the trees, trying to make sense of the markings and sounds. Then, I heard it, a soft, deliberate snapping of a twig nearby. I whipped around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. The forest held its breath. That night, in the safety of my small cabin, I pored over the photos I'd taken. The carvings, the broken branches, the footprints, they all pointed to something deliberate, a language of warning or invitation I couldn't yet understand. I searched online forums and local archives, hoping for clues, but found nothing concrete. Sleep became elusive. Every creak and groan of the house felt like the forest's voice reaching me through the night. I kept my windows locked, my camera close, and yet couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched even here. The line between courage and fear blurred. I thought about calling a friend, someone to accompany me, but hesitated. Part of me wanted to face this alone, to prove I wasn't imagining things. But deep down, I knew I needed help. The forest's secrets were bigger than me, and the shadows were growing longer. Still, despite the anxiety and the warnings, I made a silent promise to myself, I would return. I had to. There was something in that forest, something waiting to be uncovered, and I wasn't ready to walk away just yet. The forest had become a place I both feared and couldn't resist, a tangled web of secrets calling me back despite every warning etched into my mind. After days of restless nights and uneasy solitude, I knew I had to go back, to push deeper into the shadows and confront whatever lurked there. But this time, I resolved to be more cautious, more prepared. I packed my camera, a flashlight, and a small knife, just in case, and steeled myself for what lay ahead. It was late afternoon when I set off, the sun hanging low and casting long, eerie shadows between the trees. The forest was quieter than usual, the usual symphony of birds and rustling leaves muted into a heavy silence that pressed against my ears. My footsteps were soft on the mossy ground as I followed a narrow trail that wound deeper than I'd ever dared to go before. The broken branches and strange carvings had become familiar markers, guiding me onward like cryptic signposts. After an hour of walking, I stumbled upon something I hadn't expected, an abandoned campsite hidden in a small clearing. The fire pit was cold but recently used, surrounded by scattered scraps of torn fabric and a half-buried canteen. Fresh footprints circled the site, some leading further into the forest, others disappearing into the undergrowth. My heart hammered as I crouched to examine them, the prints larger and more defined than before, unmistakably human. I raised my camera, snapping photos of the eerie scene, but a sudden noise froze me in place, a low rustling from just beyond the trees. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, the beam slicing through the dimming woods. For a moment, nothing but empty shadows. Then, suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind a thick trunk, tall and cloaked in dark, tattered clothing that blended seamlessly with the forest gloom. I barely had time to react. The figure's face was obscured, hidden beneath a hood, but the eyes glinted, cold, unreadable, and fixed on me. I felt the air tighten around my chest, my breath caught between fear and disbelief. I was frozen, unable to move, as the silent watcher held its gaze. My mind screamed at me to run, to flee back the way I came, but my legs refused to obey. The figure didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there like a shadow made flesh, an impossible presence that seemed to swallow the light around it. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, drowning out every other sound. Seconds stretched into agonizing minutes. I tried to steady my breathing, willing myself to stay calm. Slowly, I began to back away, inch by inch, keeping my eyes locked on the figure. My hands trembled, flashlight shaking in my grip. The forest seemed to close in, trees bending toward me like watchful sentinels. When I was several steps back, the figure finally moved, gliding silently into the shadows, vanishing as if it had never been there. The oppressive silence returned, broken only by the distant call of a crow. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and turned, breaking into a run without looking back. I didn't stop until the campsite was far behind me, the comforting edge of the familiar woods in sight. My heart was racing, adrenaline surging through every vein. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the shadowy figure to follow, but the forest remained still and empty. Once I reached the safety of my car, I sat for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, mind reeling. The encounter had shaken something loose inside me, a raw, primal fear mixed with a fierce determination. I knew now that whatever haunted these woods was real, and it was watching. That night, sleep eluded me. Images of the cloaked figure haunted my thoughts, its silent presence etched into my memory. The forest no longer felt like a place of adventure but a trap, a labyrinth where unseen eyes tracked every step. I couldn't ignore the warning etched deep into my bones. Yet, even in the face of terror, a stubborn part of me refused to give in. I had come too far, seen too much to turn away. The forest's secrets beckoned, dark and mysterious, and I was drawn to uncover them. I promised myself I would be more careful, that next time I would bring someone with me, someone to watch my back. But the image of the figure lingered, a silent reminder that some dangers weren't meant to be faced alone. In the days that followed, I avoided the forest edges, trying to regain a sense of normalcy. But the unease never fully left me. Every shadow outside my window, every unexpected sound in the night, felt like a whisper from the woods, a reminder that the watcher was still out there, waiting. Jason and Mia had always loved camping, escaping the noise of the city and immersing themselves in the quiet beauty of nature. One weekend, they decided to explore a forest not far from where Emma had been wandering, drawn by the promise of solitude and fresh air. Setting up their tent near a small clearing, the couple settled in for a peaceful night under the stars. At first, everything seemed perfect. The crackle of their campfire, the scent of pine, and the gentle rustling of leaves created a comforting soundtrack. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness crept in, an uneasy feeling began to creep over them. Shadows seemed to stretch longer, and the usual forest sounds took on a strange, muted quality. Late into the night, Jason was the first to hear it, a faint rustling just beyond the perimeter of their campsite. He nudged Mia awake, whispering about the sound. They both listened, straining to make out what it could be. Then came a low growl, barely audible but unmistakably there. The hairs on the back of Jason's neck stood up. He grabbed his flashlight and cautiously stepped beyond the tent's glow, sweeping the beam over the dense trees. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a figure, a disheveled man lurking near the edge of the campsite. The man was gaunt, his clothes ragged and dirty, blending into the shadows like a wraith. Jason called out, his voice steady but firm, "Hey! What are you doing here?" The man didn't answer, only stared, eyes gleaming strangely in the flashlight's beam. Jason took a step forward, heart pounding, but when he looked again, the man had vanished, slipping silently into the trees as if swallowed by the darkness. Mia clutched Jason's arm, her breath shallow. "We should leave," she whispered, panic beginning to edge into her voice. They hurried back to their tent, locking the zipper and pulling the flaps tight. But the forest didn't let them rest. The rustling continued, circling their camp, accompanied by low, guttural growls that seemed too close for comfort. Every snap of a twig sent them flinching, eyes wide and searching. Determined to not let fear take over, Jason lit a lantern and decided to investigate once more. Steeling himself, he stepped outside, shining the light into the inky blackness. The forest seemed endless, shadows shifting with every movement. But there was no sign of the men, or anything else. When he returned to the tent, relief was short-lived. As they packed up their gear in the early morning light, Jason noticed something that made his blood run cold. Both of their car's tires were slashed, deep gashes cutting through the rubber. Worse yet, ominous symbols had been painted in black across the hood and doors, crude shapes that twisted and looped in strange patterns. Mia's hands trembled as she stared at the markings. What is this? Who would do something like this? Jason shook his head, the weight of dread settling over him. They were stranded, vulnerable, and trapped by something far more sinister than a random act of vandalism. With no choice but to wait for help, they stayed close to the campsite, wary and watchful. The forest around them felt alive with unseen eyes, every shadow a potential threat. Despite their fears, they tried to remain calm, but the creeping sense of being hunted gnawed at their nerves. Later that day, they sought answers in town, speaking with locals who eyed their damaged car with concern. An elderly man, a longtime resident known for his knowledge of the area's history, listened intently to their story. His face grew grave as he recounted rumors of a cult said to operate deep within the forest, an elusive group rumored to be behind the strange symbols and recent disappearances. They're said to worship old, forgotten things, he explained quietly. Secrets buried beneath the trees, darkness that's been waiting to be awakened. People who wander too deep don't always come back, and those marks, well, they're warnings or claims of territory. You're lucky to have gotten out when you did. Jason and Mia exchanged glances, the reality settling heavily on their shoulders. The forest was more than just trees and wildlife, it was a place where ancient fears lived, and something dangerous still thrived in its depths. As they left the town behind, their damaged car a grim reminder of their ordeal, the couple couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the forest held, and whether they had truly escaped its grasp. Back in town, the weight of what Jason and Mia had experienced pressed heavily on their minds. The slashed tires and ominous symbols were more than vandalism, they were a message, one tied to something far older and darker than either of them had imagined. Seeking answers, they returned to the elderly men who had first mentioned the cult, hoping to understand what they had stumbled into. He invited them into his modest home, its walls lined with faded photographs and weathered books about the region's history. Over a cup of strong, bitter tea, he spoke in hushed tones about an ancient sect rumored to inhabit the forest's depths. The cult, he explained, was believed to worship forgotten gods, entities older than the town itself, bound to the land through rituals long lost to time. They call themselves the Keepers, he said, his eyes dark with warning. Guardians of the forest's secrets, but not in any way you'd want to cross. They mark their territory with symbols, signs meant to warn and to claim. Those who ignore them risk becoming part of their offerings. Jason and Mia exchanged uneasy glances, the pieces of their terrifying encounter beginning to fit into a grim puzzle. The man recounted stories passed down from his ancestors, disappearances unspoken of, strange gatherings in the woods, and the eerie silence that fell whenever the cult was near. The symbols painted on their car matched the descriptions exactly. Meanwhile, Emma wrestled with her own experience, the memory of the cloaked figure and the whispered warnings haunting her days and nights. She'd begun to understand that the forest was not just a backdrop for her photography, it was a living, breathing entity with secrets it fiercely protected. The markings she'd found, the broken branches arranged like signs, the chilling whispers, they were all part of a language she was only beginning to comprehend. In quiet moments, both Emma and the couple reflected on their encounters, realizing how vast and impenetrable the forest's mysteries truly were. The danger that lurked beneath the canopy wasn't simply a product of imagination or isolated incidents, it was a persistent shadow, woven into the land itself. Emma thought about the strange carvings, the footprints, and the figure who had blocked her path. Jason and Mia's story of the strange man and the cult symbols echoed the same dark thread. It was as if the forest held a hidden world, one that existed alongside the familiar trails and sun-dappled clearings but remained out of reach for most. The sense of unease lingered with all of them. Emma found herself reluctant to return alone, the image of those cold, silent eyes etched into her mind. Jason and Mia, though safe for now, couldn't forget the feeling of being watched, or the harsh reality of their car's vandalism. Though their stories were separate, they converged on the same unsettling truth: the forest was a place where ancient fears lived on, where darkness pulsed just beneath the surface. The Keepers, the symbols, the disappearances, they were all part of a greater mystery, a shadowy presence that refused to be ignored. As they each moved forward, carrying the weight of what they'd seen, the forest remained, a silent, watchful force, guarding its secrets with relentless vigilance. And somewhere in its depths, the shadows waited, patient and unyielding, ready for the next chapter to unfold.